I think many people, they look at their gifts and their talents and they're like, oh, that's no big deal. They look at other people and they think, oh, they've got,
Yeah.
so much going for them. But I love the verse that says, do not despise the day of small things. And I think
Yes.
one of the things that God has taught me is offer your little bit. You may have a spiritual gift of encouragement or
Sure.
hospitality or teaching or whatever. You also have a car that can drive people places, or you
Yeah.
might have a kitchen, a home, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think regardless, everybody can bring an invitation, a question, and a blessing.
Mm.
That's something that you can gift other people.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Echoes, where we ask older Christians to share wisdom and lessons learned on their walk of faith, remember and proclaim God's goodness and faithfulness, and seek to uncover eternal truths that can help guide future generations. My name is Katharine Rose, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Eternal Echoes podcast. So today I'm so excited. We have the pleasure of hearing from Laura Crosby. And I don't know Laura personally, but we were connected through a mutual friend of ours, Sue Donaldson. I've had Sue on the podcast in the past, and she connected us, and I'm super grateful for that. So, Laura, I am so grateful that you are here, and I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I want to start by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay, well, I am 67 years old and I love adventure and travel. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm kind of the enthusiast that wants to do everything and doesn't want to miss out on anything. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and met my husband there after he had graduated from seminary and was back in the area as a youth pastor.
Mhm.
And after we got married, we served in the same church. Served in the church that I had grown up in,
Okay.
and I was teaching at the time. But I quickly discerned that really this was a team ministry and ended up leaving my teaching job. And we've always approached ministry as a team. And
Mhm.
I kind of am the entrepreneur and have started ministries wherever we've been and done some teaching and speaking and that kind of thing. But we were in the suburbs of Chicago for 5 years. And then we were in Washington, D.C. for just 2 years. I went 8 months pregnant with our second child.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was quite an adventure.
Yeah, I'm
And
sure.
then ever since then we were called really in a very supernatural way to ministry at a large church in a suburb of Minneapolis, Edina, Minnesota, where we served for 30 years. And my husband left that, retired. I hate that
Mhm.
word,
I
but
know.
he retired. I didn't. But then after that, actually, we went and were co-pastors as for an interim period at an international church in Switzerland, which was
Wow.
amazing.
Oh my
And
God.
then he was called, and we went and served at a church in the Bay Area that had
Okay.
been through a lot of trauma for a year and a half, and finished that about 2 years ago. So
Wow.
I continue to speak and write, and I guess if there was if I had to choose a life verse, it would probably be the Message paraphrase of Romans 8:15. It says, "This resurrection life you have
Mm.
received isn't a timid grave tending life, but adventurously expectant, greeting God with a childlike, 'What's next, Papa?'" So
Wow. Oh,
I
I
love,
love that.
yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
That, and Craig Groeschel's quote that I love. He says, "If you're not dead, you're not done." So
Yes.
I'm like all
Yes.
for that.
Yes, absolutely. And I love what you said too about, hating that word retirement. It's like, we never retire, in the
No,
kingdom, right?
no, we really
Yes.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, oh, that's so beautiful. So it sounds like you have had a lot of wonderful experiences in ministry and been in ministry for a long time. I have to ask the Switzerland, going to Switzerland, what was that like? That's so interesting.
It honestly, it was like waking up in The Sound of Music or Brigadoon like every morning.
That's
We lived right near the old city, and I would walk through the streets to get coffee in the morning. And I mean, it was on the lake and with the surrounded by the mountains. Yeah,
that's
it was
amazing.
incredible. We've
That
been
is amazing.
very, very fortunate. My husband was on the board of World Vision for 20 years also. So we've done a lot of travel with that.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I love, the idea of helping people to connect to God and to each other in different cultures, in different
Yeah.
settings, little small ways, big ways, whatever. So
Yes. Oh,
yeah,
that's
it's
that's
been fun.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me, were you raised in the church? Like what does your sort of story with the Lord look like and your
Yes.
journey with him from a
Yeah.
young age on?
Yeah. I'm so blessed. I grew up in a family with quite a legacy of faith. Um, but and I'll tell you more about some of that in a bit, maybe. But in spite of that legacy of faith, had not. They weren't people who talked a lot about a personal relationship with Jesus, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there was a time when I was I was probably 13, 14 years old, and I had two younger brothers, and my dad and I were all waiting for my mom to come down to go to church. And I said, Dad, why do we have to go to church every Sunday? And now, to his credit, he did not understand really how serious a question I was asking then. And he just
Right.
kind of said, well, there are just some things that it's right to do.
Yeah.
And I lived in the Leave It to Beaver Cleaver family. I mean, the all American, go to church
Yeah.
every Sunday, all that stuff. But that didn't satisfy me. So then I started to question, and I started to go to a Christian organization that you may be familiar with, Young Life,
Oh
in
yeah.
high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And as I was questioning at Young Life, I saw leaders with a joy and a peace and a sense of their own identity
Yep.
that I felt like I was missing. I saw something I wanted, and gradually I began to learn about this Jesus, that it was Christianity wasn't just about religion; it was about a relationship with
Yeah.
Him, um, and I understood the basics. And so one evening, I got home and I was like, I'm this is it. I want to be a Christian. I'm going to pray tonight. So
Yeah.
I sat on the edge of my bed
Yeah.
in my room with the pink flower wallpaper and everything, and I closed my eyes and I prayed, and nothing happened. And I was like, I expected, like, the angels to sing,
Yes.
or
Wait.
chills or emotion or something.
Right.
Like,
Right.
nothing
Right.
happened. And I made like the classic mistake, right? I took my Bible and I just like opened it and pointed to a place to get the answer of what happened. What did I do wrong?
Right.
Happened to point to the verse that talks about separating the sheep from the goats. Now, I took it totally out of context, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a goat.
I'm a
He
goat.
doesn't
Yeah.
love me. I'm a goat. And so I was
Oh no.
I was devastated. But the next day, I went to a small subset of Young Life
Yeah.
that was supposed to be for Christians. And when I went to this gathering, they split us into small groups to pray together. And I was with another friend of mine who was a Christian, and then one of the leaders. And the first thing they said was, Laura, are you a Christian? And I didn't want to admit that I was a goat. So I was like, um, I'm not sure. So at the end of the meeting, the leader came to me and she said, Laura, if you're not sure, this little booklet might help. And she
Yeah.
gave me the Four Spiritual Laws booklet. I
Wow.
sat on the edge of my bed the next night with
Yeah.
this little booklet, and it went through what I knew. I knew I was separated from God
Yeah.
through the sin in my life. And I
Yep.
knew that Jesus had died to pay the penalty for my
Yes.
sin, and that I needed to trust him as my Lord and Savior. I know that.
Yes.
But I got to the end, and there is a train, and the engine says faith, and the next car says fact, and the last car says feeling.
Yeah.
And it explains that we come to Christ through faith, based on the facts that we know,
Yeah.
and that the feelings are going to be a caboose. Sometimes you may feel close to God, sometimes you may not. Sometimes you may have an emotional experience, sometimes not.
Right.
So I prayed again with the assurance that
Right.
I was a Christian and not a goat.
Yeah. I love that. Oh my gosh. I think that's so relatable though, where it's like we have these grand expectations in our head of, and sometimes there is an encounter with God where it's just like, oh my gosh, but
Yeah,
oftentimes it
yeah,
is just that simple prayer and just trusting and
yeah,
trusting that I love that analogy of the train and the feelings coming as the caboose, because the
yeah,
feelings aren't always there.
yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. So what, I mean, from that moment on, and where and you talked about, understanding that Christianity is not just a religion, it is a relationship with the living God.
Mm,
What have you come to learn on your
mm,
walk with the Lord about
mm,
him
mm.
that maybe you wish you had known when you were younger, or just have come to learn it in general?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The very biggest thing I would say that I learned didn't come until probably now 25 years ago. Um, I, like I said, I kind of grew up in a charmed family and everything went right. You made choices and
Yeah.
people responded in kind and, all that kind of thing. But as I did more in ministry, people would ask me, "Don't you want to go to seminary?" And I would say, "Absolutely, I would love to go to seminary," but I knew it wasn't the right time. My
Yeah.
kids were still at home and everything. But there came a time when my kids were in high school and I was out on a jet ski on a lake,
Mhm.
as you do in Minnesota.
Right, right.
And there was just this clear sense of it's time, it's time. And
Wow.
so my husband checked with the personnel committee, and I'm sure that there are people listening to this of all different denominations, and
Yeah.
some embrace the idea of women in ministry, and others
Yes.
may not.
Yep.
And I understand that,
Yeah.
but we are in a place where we affirm the pastoral calling of women. And so my husband went to the personnel committee at our church and said, "Laura's thinking about going to seminary. She's been doing, I've done a bunch of stuff at the
Yeah.
church. No favoritism, no favors, whatever. But if there's ever a position open sometime in the future, is it reasonable to think that she might be able to be considered?" And they were like, "Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely." We had other
Yeah.
husbands and wives, couples on staff,
Okay.
large church. And so I finished seminary. My husband went back to the committee. There were different people on the committee. And he said, "I just wanted to remind you this, Laura's finishing and blah, blah, blah." And they're like, I think we're going to change that policy. I don't think it's wise for the wife of the senior pastor,
Yeah.
the lead pastor, to
Yeah.
also be on staff. So they changed that, kind of threw us for a loop.
Yeah.
It up There were a lot of people in the church and staff that were upset, so it had to be sorted out and everything.
Yeah.
But we prayed about it, tried to see a way forward, and
Yeah.
did for a while. But something else came up, and that was they ended up hiring somebody a couple of years later that could have been me on paper,
Okay.
and they had. It was a lot of miscommunication, and
Sure.
everybody was doing their best, but
Yeah.
it made it much more difficult for me to have a place to use my gifts. And
Sure.
we had prayed about the idea of me investing in a different church community, and that just
Yeah.
it wasn't us. We were
Sure.
invested together in this. So anyway, I all that to
Yeah.
say that what I learned was so important, that I had been dependent on a title and a paycheck to validate me.
Ah,
And that was not what God wanted. I needed to be rooted in my identity in Christ. And
yeah.
through this very long, painful, complicated several years
Yeah.
that I won't go into, He walked with me and taught me through, like I say, just a lot of pain,
Yeah.
um, that I couldn't be dependent on anything external to
Yes.
validate me. I'm a beloved child of Christ, and
Yeah.
that's not going to change. Anything else can change,
Yes.
So and so it's amazing, Catherine, the way he has tailored what I've been able to do to my personality
Yeah.
instead of kind of having to be on a staff and have a
Sure.
um, regular, I don't know,
What
a
more
job description
structured?
that stays the same and,
Yeah.
whatever. I get so much variety and I
Wow.
love it. I've just been able to have so many adventures. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting. We were talking before you pressed play
Mhm.
and talking about your journey
Yeah.
and the way God has led you
Yeah.
and how he might desire to use your gifts. There came a point, we did a couple of different sabbaticals over the last 35 years, and um, one of them, this was in 2011, we did one where we spent a month a month in Africa, a month in Switzerland. We were in Italy. I
Wow.
mean, we were all over the world,
Yeah.
South America.
Yeah.
But um, because we were traveling around the world, people had said, Laura, you really ought to keep a blog so that the church
Yeah.
can keep up with, what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I did, and I had done that. And when we came back after that time, I was like, okay, Lord, what now?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
And as I was walking one day, the story he brought to mind was Elijah and the widow of Zarephath.
Oh,
And if you remember, Elijah has been being fed by ravens, and
yeah.
the brook dries up, and God tells him to go to the widow of Zarephath and get food from her.
Yeah.
So he shows up and he asks her, "Please bring me some water, and please bring me a cake of bread, a loaf
Uh-huh.
of bread."
Mhm.
And she says, "What? All I have is a handful of flour and a little oil. That's all I have."
Yeah.
And she says, I don't have, we're just going to die. This is it.
Yeah.
And God and Elijah says, no, go do it and God will make it enough. And God does.
Wow.
And nothing runs out. And what I felt God saying to me in that time is, okay, Laura, what's your flour and oil?
Yeah.
What is it that I have in your hands that you feel like is not enough? Well, I had been keeping this blog while we were
Yeah.
on sabbatical,
Yeah.
and so I was like, well, I can keep doing that. And,
Yeah.
that's a bit of a ministry platform. And
Yeah.
so anyway, so that was that step in that time. But since then, there have been all kinds of wonderful invitations to do other kinds of ministry things. So,
Yeah, that's so I mean, you touch on so many good points. One is, your identity and grounding yourself, not looking for that external, because I think that's all we all want, that that title, that external validation,
yeah,
and
yeah,
but really understanding, and I love what you said too. It's like your identity is the only thing that doesn't change. Everything else around us can change, ebbs and flows and all of it, but understanding that you are a child of God and that is the most important, part of your identity.
mhm.
So that's so beautiful. And also, talk a little bit more about, you mentioned your giftings and kind of being able to go to God and say, okay, this is what I have. So can you talk a little bit about how the Lord, grew you through your ministry and through the giftings that He gave you?
Yeah. And I think it, if you're like me, I think many people, they look at their gifts and their talents and they're like, oh, that's no big deal. They look at other people and they think, oh, they've got,
Yeah.
so much going for them. But I love the verse that says, do not despise the day of small things. And I think
Yes.
one of the things that God has taught me is um, offer your little bit. And um, I, I love the idea that everyone, I mean, you may have a spiritual gift of encouragement or
Sure.
hospitality or teaching or whatever. You also have, you may have a car that can drive people places, or you
Yep.
might have a kitchen, a home, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think regardless, everybody can bring an invitation, a question, and a blessing.
Mm,
That's something that you can gift other people.
yeah.
That's something that you have. You can invite somebody into your home. You can invite somebody for a walk. You can invite somebody to sit with you at church. You
Yes.
can affirm somebody. You can write a note telling them what you see in them.
Yes.
You can ask them a question. You can say, "Wow, you are so good at gathering people at in your home. How
Yeah.
do you do that?"
Yes.
And so I think for me, the natural thing that seems like, oh, that's no big deal, is honestly gathering people and connecting people. So I love gathering people. I
Yeah.
love connecting them,
Yeah.
and so that's
Yeah.
what I do mostly, trying to help people connect to God and each other.
Yes. Well, and you have a book, right? That's called, right? Am I right?
Choosing welcome. Yes.
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 Connecting with God and others in I haven't landed on the exact
Okay.
subtitle. So it's not published yet,
It's
but
not published. Okay.
hopefully very, very soon.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. So the first section is on how we connect with God, and the
Okay.
second is on connecting with others. And it's really just a lot of stories
Sure.
of my experiences from around the world.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's beautiful. And so, practically speaking, as far as connecting with God, what would you offer people as far as practical tips on how to connect with God and how to connect with
yes.
others?
Yes, yes, yes. So I think I often ask people to think of like the best invitations they've ever gotten. Like what was
Mm,
the coolest invitation? And my spiritual director often asks a question that is hard to answer. As she asks, "What's the invitation of God to you today?" Now, um, the invitation can be different in different seasons, that God may be calling us to different things in
sure.
different seasons, but God's invitation every single day, no matter what, is to spend time with him.
Yes.
And to think, like you might think, oh, if I had an invitation to have dinner with um, I don't know, Taylor Swift
Yeah.
or somebody, I'd be, oh my gosh. But we have an invitation from the creator of the universe to spend
Yes.
time with him. And somebody, a mentor of mine a long time ago said, you know what, Laura, when my kids were tiny, she said, setting aside time to spend with God is really challenging now, and
Yeah.
probably most challenging in that season when you physically are needed for so
Yes.
much.
Yes.
But you may have other things too. Maybe you're caring for an elderly parent or whatever. You have other stuff. She said it's really hard when your kids are little, but it is going to be a hard every single season because there's always going to be something to distract you, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so if you make the practice of setting aside that time with God now,
Yeah.
that is a practice that will serve you well. And so for me, it involves, I know this kind of sounds crazy.
No.
I walk to a
Yeah.
Starbucks, and then down here,
Yeah.
I walk to the beach. I
Yeah.
walk the beach, and then I sit with my coffee outside
Yeah.
and pray. And I use, because I like variety in different seasons, I'll use different devotionals, or I'm also part of a Bible study, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that during Lent that I've been doing that is really hard for me as an extrovert is
Uh-huh.
I've been doing silent contemplative prayer, where you
Oh,
just, like, you set aside a timer and you just try to be with God
yes.
during that silence.
Yeah.
I'm not good at silence and solitude,
No,
right?
that's hard. Not many
Yeah.
of us are. Yeah.
So, but the thing is, like, and my mind, I'm really bad at it. So my mind will spin and
Yeah.
I'll think of all these things, and it's hard to not try to be productive. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, Lord, what do you want to say to me? Okay, what do you want to say to me? But
Yes.
what I feel like one of the overwhelming things for me is I'm so distractible. And the thing that has struck me is God is never distracted.
Hmm.
He's never in a hurry.
Hmm.
He gives me his full attention and his full affection
Yes.
when I'm aware of it and when I'm not, you know?
Yes. Yes.
And I just prayed, Lord, help me to be to you what you are to me. Help me to
Yes.
be as present to you, right?
Yes.
And it's so hard.
It's so
So hard.
it is. Especially in our world, right, where there are just endless distractions. I mean,
Yes.
endless distractions. And
Yeah.
so really setting aside, I mean, it is like a true discipline of like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I am setting
Yeah.
aside everything and I'm just going to try to give God my undivided attention. But to your point, it can be challenging. It
Yeah.
can be challenging.
And it's so counterintuitive because it's like a discipline of grace. So
Yeah.
it's a discipline in not being productive, but
Yes.
just being with God. It's like God
Right.
saying, just stand here and enjoy this with
Yeah.
me, you know?
Right, right. And when you put it like that, it's like it sounds so simple, but it is we just struggle with
Oh,
that.
oh,
We're always striving and feeling like we have to do and go. And he's like, just rest,
yeah,
just rest in me.
yeah.
So that's great. And so what about on the other side of that, connecting with others? What are some practical tips for connecting with other people?
Yeah. Well, I speak out of a place of this is, what I love to do. Not everybody, it's not
Yes.
everybody's jam. And
Yeah.
so it might look different for an introvert or for someone who is not as comfortable opening their home. But
Sure.
I love getting creative. And so uh, every year for the last few summers, we've got, what do you call bunting. I've
Oh, okay.
made some bunting and,
Yeah.
strung it between the trees in our front yard.
Yeah.
And I put flyers around the neighborhood that say, come to Sundays on Sunday,
Oh,
Sundaes on Sunday, the day Sunday.
oh wow.
And so we just have ice cream out and we have rip your floats or ice cream and invite the neighbors to just stop by and they play in
Yeah.
the front yard, while we do Sundays. And I have had a big foam core board with the neighborhood drawn on it, a map, so people
Yeah.
can fill in their name and
Yeah.
addresses. And so out of that, then I started doing some like happy hours for the women on my patio,
Oh,
sometimes
that's
just the
so
women
nice.
in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Down here, it is it's harder to entertain when it's not your place. We just rent and
Yes.
I don't have my stuff and all everything, but
Yeah.
you do what you can. So
Yeah.
because our world is so divided, especially politically, last year I sent out links to two different podcasts that talked about how do we, when we have Jesus in common, but
Yeah.
we may be at different places politically, how do we talk together and listen together and not be so divided? And
Yes.
so I did something, somebody else came up with this title, but I did something called Pizza and Podcast. And so I invited three or four other couples, and I knew they were at different places on the political
Yeah.
spectrum,
Yeah.
and asked them to listen to these podcasts
Yeah.
and I sent them a few questions. And so we just had pizza
Yeah.
and discussed it. And because these were mature believers, it worked
Yes.
well.
Yes.
I was glad.
Mature. I was going to say keyword mature, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. We were very fortunate.
Yeah.
People were able to listen to each other
Yes.
and
Yes.
not get angry if they disagreed.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so that was another one.
Yeah.
And gosh, I've done I've done come to cook dinners where um, I just pair people off with
Yeah.
somebody that's not their spouse
Yeah.
and do a simple dinner, a
Oh,
stir
wow.
fry or a pasta thing, and
Yeah.
everybody works together. And those have proven to be really, really fun because nobody's worried, I mean, about how it looks or how it turns out. They're working together side
Yeah.
by side, and yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
that's great. That's great. It sounds like you create spaces for people.
yes,
It's
yeah,
something as simple as just creating a space to come together.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to kind of follow up on something that you've touched on a little bit, which is mentoring. You've mentioned you've had mentors, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role that mentors have played in your own life and your own experience with mentoring and the importance of it.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know what? I've never had an official mentor,
Okay.
but I've been blessed to have older women in my life who have poured into me, invested in me, especially modeled for me what it means to follow Jesus. And I will say probably the one that I talk about the most was the senior pastor's wife when we lived in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And she is actually down here now, and she's 96 years old, and she is probably the most Christ-like person I know.
Wow.
But I have so many snapshots, not that she sat down with me and did a Bible study, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which can be a great thing,
Yes.
but she just walked alongside me and I
Yeah.
saw what she did. So
Yes.
um, we were at I had two kids under two, and we went to this huge party at this mansion, basically, and there was a buffet, and then people were spreading out throughout the house and everything. And I was like, "Yes, I'm out of the house. I'm away from my kids. I can have conversation with adults and all this stuff."
Yeah.
And I was so excited. Went through the line. I was walking down the hall to find a place to eat,
Yeah.
and I passed this tiny little study, a
Yeah.
little den, and my mentor's name was Coke.
Okay.
Her name was Colleen, but everybody calls her Coke.
Okay.
And there was Coke sitting on this love seat with this morbidly obese, very socially inept woman. And Coke was looking at her, listening to her like she was the most wonderful person in the whole world,
Oh, wow.
just with rapt attention. And I was like, Coke could have chosen to be anywhere else
Oh
in
my
this house,
gosh.
and that's what she chose.
What a beautiful picture of like
Yeah,
being Jesus,
I
right? To
know.
someone. Yeah.
I know. And then another time there, if anybody who's listening to this has been
Yeah.
in ministry, you'll get criticized. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah.
And there was this guy in the church in Washington, D.C., who had just been very, very meanly critical
Yeah.
of Coke's husband. And there was going to be some type of concert downstairs in Fellowship Hall one day. And I came down, I was early. I came down, Coke was there early. She was sitting next to this mean man, holding his hands, listening to him
Wow.
because I think his wife had died or something. But so, I mean, totally forgiving, totally gracious.
Wow.
I just always think of the verse that says, "Let your words be with grace, seasoned with
Seasoned
salt." I'm
salt.
not going to say it
Yes. So that you may know how to respond to people.
right.
Right.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So,
Oh, that's so good.
yes. So I was fortunate in that, and then my my grandmother, my aunt, and my mom
Yeah.
were amazing. My grandmother, she was absolutely amazing. She learned she was going to be going blind
Uh-huh.
later in life.
Mhm.
And she wasn't like, "Oh, praise God," it's like, this is
Yeah.
going to be hard. But she
Right.
said, but you know what? I have a really nice phone voice. I could get one of those phones with the giant numbers and I could call anybody who visits our church and welcome them.
No way.
So she found a way to do ministry even with the limitations,
Oh,
right?
that's so that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I love that. I love that.
But I think if somebody wants to get a mentor,
Yeah.
what I always suggest is that you find, say, three people around you who you admire,
Yeah.
and you ask them out to coffee,
Yeah.
and you have you just get to know them, have some
Yeah.
questions that you'd like to ask them to get to know them.
Yeah.
And if after you've done that, if one of them seems like, oh, there seems to be a connection here,
Right.
really think and pray about what is it that you want out of the mentoring relationship.
Yeah.
Be very clear about, do you want somebody who's going to sit down with you and do a Bible study weekly or bi-weekly or whatever?
Yeah.
Or do you want, what is it exactly? And then ask the person. The
Yeah.
worst they can do is say no. They will be flattered no matter what.
Right. Right.
But what you need to do for them is be clear about what it is you're envisioning, what you
Yes.
think you need,
Yes.
because that's only fair for them, right?
I think that's great advice. And I think where people, or where at least I know some people struggle just in my conversations, is they're afraid to ask, people, because they're afraid of that rejection.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
afraid, but just recognizing it's okay if they say no,
absolutely.
it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, no, that's great advice. So, what words of wisdom would you pass on to the next and younger generation about either, I'll pose it as either just about going through life and life or journeying with God? What words of wisdom come to mind?
Boy, I don't say these are words of wisdom. I can only offer maybe some of the things that I feel like maybe I've learned and have come to be important. I'm as enthusiastic as I am, I'm also can be impatient.
Yeah.
And I've learned I need to ask a lot more questions
Mm,
and sit with God longer than my first inclination might be.
yeah.
And to pay attention, especially um, when emotion comes up in you, when you feel threatened, when you feel angry, when you feel jealous, to take a step back and say, where's that coming from, Lord?
Mm.
Where is that coming from? And what might you have to teach me in it?
Oh, that's so good.
Um,
That's so good.
so yes, the questioning. When I came to Christ, I mean, everybody I think loves black and white. Most people love black and white. I love black and white. I wish everything was black and white, but it's not. And I think there are things that
Yes.
are, but
Yes.
definitely. But I think instead of jumping,
Yeah.
asking questions to better understand
Yes.
is important. Better understand where people are coming from and better understand why people are acting the way they are.
Yeah.
One of the things I feel like we've learned in ministry is, gosh, every person walks into church with a different story, a different burden, a different perspective.
Yes.
And we need, in order to pastor well,
Yeah.
in order to care for others well, we really need to listen and listen to the stories that people are bringing with them in.
Yes. Yes. Listening. I think listening is just so underrated. I mean, that in and of itself is just a ministry, just to simply listen to someone, to say, hey, what's going on, or what's your story? What's your story? And just
Mhm.
allowing and creating that space for them to share.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. But I love that question you posed of, is when emotions come up and something arises that's like kind of, uh-oh, what is that? Like going and asking, okay, Lord, what are you after in that? Taking that moment
Where
rather
did
than,
it come from?
yes. And I think we can be so quick when we have that emotion to, respond and act out of that. But like, wait a second, where did that come from? So I think that's so valuable and so
Mhm.
important to take that pause and ask that question.
Yeah. One of the things I learned in that area years ago was I was um, the head of a committee or of a ministry thing, and someone told me they felt discounted and like I hadn't asked their opinion or whatever. And I realized how much I was leading out of fear and
Mm,
control. Like,
mm,
okay, if I don't get this right, I need to control things because it needs to be right and whatever. I was like, it was this huge aha. You know what? You're not in control. This is God's thing.
yes.
And you can collaborate, you can ask questions, you can
Yes.
use the gifts of others, and yeah.
Yeah. But surrendering that control, or the idea that we are even in somehow in control, like you said, like we're not we think we are, and we want to kind of seem like, but it's like we're really not at the end of the day, you know? Oh,
Yeah.
that's so good. Um, well, Laura, this has just been so great. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything else on your heart that you want to share before we wrap things up?
No,
Yeah.
it's just I've loved talking with you and
Yeah.
I'm excited for your new ministry possibilities and
Thank
everything.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so tell listeners, if they want if to connect with you or follow you, how can they connect with
Yeah.
you?
So I'm most active on Instagram, just
Okay.
Laura Crosby,
Okay.
and I have a website, lauracrosby.me, where you can read old blog posts. I'm not blogging right now, but
Mhm.
speaking and writing opportunities, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd
Wonderful.
love to connect.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here, and it's just been a joy getting to talk to you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Eternal Echoes podcast. If your soul was nourished in any way by today's episode, I'd be so grateful if you share it with others, share it on social media, or take a quick moment to leave a rating or review. Also be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Eternal Echoes Ministry. Thank you for joining me, and may God bless you today and always.